engaged?
Well, to be honest, the only thing that keeps me awake at night is jet lag occasionally, but not too often actually. But if I were to think of three things, I think one, the shocks that the international order has been experiencing. Because if you were to look at the last 3 decades, globalization, spread of technology, uh, these were uh, these were even the rebalancing, the prosperity, the high growth rates in Asia particularly. These were the dominant trends, and in particularly the last 2 years since we've had the last physical meeting of the Raisina dialogue, we've really had some big shocks. COVID was a shock. Afghanistan was a shock. Ukraine is a shock. In a sense, the sharper friction between big powers, between the West and Russia, between the United States and China, these two have added to it. So I think I won't say it keeps me awake at night, but certainly it's something which anybody doing foreign policy needs to spend a lot of time trying to get the world right. The second point I would make is if you are trying to get the world right, you obviously need um, operational metrics to respond to the world which is changing. So how do you how do you develop that? How do you update that? How do you course correct? And in our case, we have, especially since 2014, 2015, roughly the same time as Raisina actually has come into being, we've had a much greater clarity about how we engage the world. We've done it in a sense in concentric circles. There's a neighborhood first. There are these extended neighborhoods in Southeast Asia and the Gulf, in Central Asia. There's a very conscious policy of engaging all the major powers simultaneously in a world, in a policy which Shashi claims credit for, called multi-alignment. We still haven't quite agreed what the word should be. I would say also, how do you develop a larger global footprint? But to do all of that, the third issue is how do you develop the capabilities? I think Jay Panda before referred to Atmanirbhar Bharat, a more self-reliant India. Self-reliant not just in capabilities, but self-reliant in mindset, and self-reliant in terms of shouldering greater responsibilities. But again, you need a narrative that would accompany that, a narrative in a sense of a new India. So therefore, to me, getting the world right, issue number one. Developing the operational strategy to deal with that world, issue number two. And then developing the capabilities and the narratives to deal with that. That would be my three big ones.
So, Dr. Jaishankar, as agreed, we will turn to the audience straight. And I think we have esteemed guests with us today. And I'm going to first invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Norway, Minister Hoodfield, to pose the first question to you. My colleagues will get you the mic.
So thank you. And the joy of the Raisina dialogue is that it is hosted by the world's largest democracy. Russia's aggression towards Ukraine is an example of an authoritarian state attacking a democracy. Indeed, many would say that Russia attacked Ukraine precisely because it's a democracy. How does India, as the world's largest democracy, see its role in defending free societies globally?
Well, I think in a sense some of that was debated with the earlier panel. I think where the conflict in Ukraine is concerned, we have a fairly clear position that has been articulated, a position which emphasizes the urgent cessation of fighting, which urges a return to diplomacy and dialogue, which stresses the need to respect sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. But since you raised it as a larger issue, I do think this is an issue of concern, not just for India, because the fact is that there are different countries who in a sense evolve a combination of values, interests, history, experience, culture to approach conflicts and specific situations. I mean, you spoke about Ukraine. I could also, I remember less than a year ago what happened in Afghanistan, where an entire civil society was thrown under the bus by the world. Or we in Asia face our own sets of challenges, which often, I would say, impact on the rules-based order. So, I would say, quite honestly, all of us would like to find the right balance of our beliefs, of our interests, of our experience, and that's really what we're all trying to do. And it looks different from different parts of the world. The priorities are different. That's quite natural. But as I said, at the moment, these shocks are really for all of us to be concerned about, because each of these events, Afghanistan, COVID, Ukraine, big power rivalry, have global consequences, and consequences for the everyday person.
Sir, let me turn to the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Luxembourg, Minister Asselborn, and invite him into this conversation. Like, can I get a mic? The mic there, right behind you. Yeah.
Thank you. Dear Minister, you are a diplomat, and you became sort of a very big country. I am not diplomat, and I am till.
But you are the senior most of my colleagues.
Since 2004, I am Prime Minister of a very small country, member of the European Union. So my question is, dear colleague, we know that a few weeks ago, Sergei Lavrov, who was appointed in 2004, same year as myself, he was here in Delhi. Can you tell us a little bit the justification of what Russia is doing in Ukraine? We heard in Europe always a denazification and then also to prevent the genocide of Russians in Ukraine. So really the justification of such a military intervention after the 24th of February this year, how does he explain it to you? He is a diplomat. He was represented Russia in the Soviet Union before in New York. He is minister since 17, 18 years. And I think everything that Russia is doing in Ukraine is really against international law and also the Charter of the UN. Thank you.
Well, look, if you want to know the justification of Russia, that's for Sergei Lavrov to do. I'm prepared to justify what India's views are on Ukraine or any other matter. And in terms of what justification he has offered, I think he's engaged many of you in Europe probably more on the subject than he's engaged us. So I don't think I have anything particularly new to contribute to that. But again, look, I do want, I recognize today that the conflict in Ukraine is the dominant issue, if not among the dominant issues of the day. And it's a dominant issue not just in terms of principles and values alone, also in terms of the practical consequences of it, the knock-on effects. You have, in this part of the world, not just here in Africa, in other parts of Asia, People are seeing the conflict play out in terms of higher energy prices, in terms of food inflation, in terms of disruptions of various kinds. So the truth is, there is really nobody who wants to see this conflict. I mean, there will be no winners out of this conflict. But I also stress, and I say this to you because both of you are my European colleagues, and I understand that at this moment, this would probably occupy you to the exclusion of almost everything else. But there is also a world out there, and I'm very glad that you're sitting here in India, because it would remind you that there are equally pressing issues in other parts of the world. I mentioned Afghanistan. I mentioned the challenges which we faced in Asia. And if I were to put those very challenges in terms of principles, I mean, when a rules-based order was under challenge in Asia, the advice we got from Europe is do more trade. At least we're not giving you that advice. And in terms of Afghanistan, I mean, please show me which part of the rules-based order justified what the world did there. So let's I think see this in the right context. Our position is that we all have to find some way of returning to diplomacy and dialogue. And to do that, the fighting must stop. I think that is really the focus of what we are trying to do.
Let me move away from Europe to another. Minister Loxit, can we have the mic here? Can we have the mic, Aditya, to Minister Loxit, please? Thank you, Aditya.
I think this issue of genocide should be put in this context. When asked of India, you're talking about the country that sent an army to prevent the extinction of the people who would later become Bangladesh. I remember that because I was young. Andre Malraux, in his grandiloquent way, said he would form a legion to fight there as they had fought in the Spanish Civil War. So this is India, the country that answers the call when people are facing genocide. Thank you.
Can I turn to the Minister from Madagascar, Richard Randria Mandelato? I hope I got the name right. Nearly.
Yes, thank you. I'm from Madagascar, West Indian Ocean island, next to Mauritius, Seychelles, Comoros, and my question is regarding the Indo-Pacific vision and ambition that we both share. To start with, let me point it out that India and Madagascar made the same choice as regard to Ukraine. We voted abstention, if I may say so. So we have something in common. But my question as regard to this vision of Indo-Pacific, how do you see the leadership of your country, if we may take it as a leadership, natural leadership, because your country is so big compared, for example, to Madagascar? How do you see it, and where do we start? How do we materialize such a vision from the West Indian Ocean perspective? Because we spoke about, the Chinese and that part of the Indo-Pacific, but from the west side of Indian Ocean, how do you see that, Mr. Minister? Thank you.
Can I just add something to that, sir? Is there now a more broader consensus that the Harry Harris definition of the Indo-Pacific from Bollywood to Hollywood is no longer valid, and perhaps it has to go to the Western Indian Ocean as well? Is that a more broader acceptance of that idea?
Well, yes, except that Western Indian Ocean is not alliterative with Bollywood and Hollywood, so I think you need a catch phrase out there. But no, I think the minister's question is a very valid one, because there are really 2 or 3 sets of forces at play here. I think one, as Indian Ocean countries, we need to, in a sense, recognize and reclaim our history. That we were a very vibrant, pluralistic ecosystem for the passage of commerce and culture for many, many years. Now, this was disrupted during the colonial times. And I think as part of today, the changing world, a much more globalized world, a much more rebalanced world, how do you rebuild our economies? How do we actually do more interactions with each other rather than go through intermediaries of a very different era? And in that sense, recreating the Indian Ocean, I would say, I'm using community with a small c here, and also how do we look for solutions amongst each others, not necessarily looking to countries far away, because I think in this day and age, perhaps many of those countries will no longer be here at times of need. So when you have natural disasters, as we've seen in East Africa and the Western Indian Ocean, it's important that within the Indian Ocean we find solutions and we partner each other. So in 2015, Prime Minister Modi actually put forward a vision called Sagar, which is literally a word, it's an acronym, but it means ocean, which was security and growth for all in the region. And that's been, in a sense, the template by which we have really stepped up our cooperation with a lot of countries, including Madagascar. And now, where the Indo-Pacific is concerned, I think there's a slightly different issue there, which is that the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean have become much more seamless, because countries on either side of that imaginary divide are actually have political, security, and economic interests, and therefore it's actually untenable to see them in compartmentalized terms. So that's, I would say, a larger geopolitical happening which is taking place. And to me, the two are completely sort of reconcilable. A stronger Indian Ocean activities actually contribute to the Indo-Pacific as well.
So let me stay with the Indian Ocean, and let me turn to Minister Amina Chona. Maybe she can come in at this stage. Siddhartha, can we get Aditya, can we get the mic here? And maybe
Thank you, Samir. It's good to be here. I was here years ago as a Raisina Young Fellow. And Minister, I am representing the Maldives, and I'm the Environment Minister as well. And climate change is an existential threat for us. I do believe the commitment made by India in COP26 is by far one of the most ambitious mitigation targets we heard. And I also understand how complicated energy transition is for India, particularly because we still have millions without access to power, and development is a necessity for India and for South Asia as well. But climate change, as I said, is an existential threat. I don't think it's just for small island nations like the Maldives, but even for India. We have the highest mountains in South Asia. We also have small island states like us, which is one of the lowest countries in the world. We don't have higher ground. So my question is, as we enter into a world which is complicated by energy, conflict, and issues like this, we also have climate change before us that we can't wait to address these things until countries are comfortable to deal with it. So how do you see climate politics will evolve given the nature, given the urgency of this issue that we have? Thank you.
Well, from the Indian perspective, I mean, first of all, I agree with everything you said. And from the Indian perspective, there are two parts to this issue. One is climate action, and I look at it in terms of what we ourselves do, and the other is climate justice. And we need both, which is everybody needs to do the utmost that they can, but also ensure that there's the more vulnerable, the more exposed, the less resourced countries and societies are actually supported in this challenge. Now, we all know that, the story of climate change, how there have been repeatedly, the promises of resources which have been given in COP after COP have not been kept. But at the same time, because others are not keeping the word, doesn't mean you don't do what you can do and will do, and that's the approach which we have taken. From our point of view, if you look between, I'd say it's now 6 years since Paris happened. We are probably among the few G20 economies which have actually kept to our Paris commitments. And we are careful about making commitments. We don't overpromise. We try, but we are sincere about what we promise. So I'm pretty confident that what we have committed to do in COP26, we will do. In terms of the challenges which small island developing states are facing, for us, that comes right on top because they are actually the most vulnerable. And whether it is, many of our initiatives, the International Solar Alliance Initiative, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure Initiative, some of the newer initiatives that we tabled at COP26 are actually aimed at highlighting the predicament of small islands. And again, I say this, look, there are conflicts in the world. I'm not minimizing them. I fully understand the seriousness of.
I know we are in the largest democracy of the world, but no one has actually expressed in terms of riots or going to the streets. And second thing, in terms of upping its role in trilateral relationships, and you spoke about helping within sub-communities or community with small c. And how can India actually help the Indo-Pacific region and more specifically the SIDS and more specifically Mauritius? Thank you.
Look, let me actually give you a set of answers. One, let's look at the immediate crisis we are facing, the knock-on effects of the Ukraine conflict. As I said, one impact of that we see in energy prices, but one we see in terms of food shortages and food inflation. And India can make a difference today by stepping in terms of export of agricultural commodities, especially wheat, and that is the case. We are trying to see how we can supply more wheat to meet global shortfalls. There are, of course, some constraints here, which is that what we have in terms of public stocks, there are WTO limits on trading with those stocks. But this is a very unusual situation, so we hope that the WTO would look at it in that manner. But if we can contribute today to alleviate food shortages, whether it's it's government purchases, expanding the markets, helping the World Food Program, I think this is a very big contribution that we can make, and we are prepared to make that. In terms of something longer term, we've always had a history of South-South cooperation, even when our resources were less, our income levels were lower. We've always tried to do, we tried to share what we could. It's been visible in terms of projects, in terms of training, in terms of education, and in terms of sharing experiences and best practices. Now that has steadily expanded as we have become bigger. I mean, in the case of Mauritius, there are some very good examples of that development partnership. The metro in Mauritius, the Supreme Court in Mauritius, social housing projects. These are all good examples, and I can pretty much cite that across a very large part of the developing world. I think today, if I were to look in terms of our development projects, I think probably